Hello and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and today we're working with genuine glorious gemstones. Now these are part of the beautiful ombre collection, but there is always something sassy and gorgeous at Jessie James. Let's head down to the board and I want to show you a sun catcher today. So the gemstone in question today is crackle agate. Now I've always known this particular agate as dragon's vein agate. Looks very much like a dragon's egg to me, and it comes on the strand with 7 of each of these colours. Now they are absolutely gorgeous. I love them. They have this semi-matte feel to them. So we're going to make a sunlight catcher, and I'll show you how to create the word love to sit in the centre of that. However, if you didn't fancy some word art, you could very simply create a little dangle to hang from the spiral up at the top. Now, in order to save you some pain, I've threaded 3 of each of those dragon's vein or crackle agates onto a 15-inch length of 18 gauge round wire. I'm using a silver colour today, and I've just turned a small loop on either end just to stop those beads from escaping, because beads on the floor is not what we're after. So 18 gauge wire around about a 15-inch length will give you plenty of options of how you want to finish this off. And what we're going to do now is to overlay these beads with another piece of wire. Now I'm keeping mine on the reel. This is 20 gauge round. I'm using artistic wire today, which is a craft wire, but you could use any medium or soft wire. 20 gauge is ideal, but you could also use 22 gauge. Now it gets a little bit noisy with the reel clanging around on the desk, but it just means that you don't have to deal with a great big long length of cut wire, which can kind of catch on things and cause a little bit of damage by itself. So I'm just going to pop this out of the way, but we're working directly from the spool today. And what we're going to do is to just open out that circular form. It's just a little bit easier to show you that all on screen at once. And we're going to start a couple of inches from one end. And what we're going to do is to just warm through that lighter 20 gauge wire and wrap a couple of times around, probably 3 inches from one end. So let's just put around about an inch over the top of that heavier wire and just draw that around 3 times to get a really good strong connection to that frame wire. So there are 3 rotations. What we'll do is we'll just trim away the excess, pop that in the scrap pot, and then we'll tidy up that little sticky uppy bit on the end. Make sure that that sits flush down over the top of that core wire. Give that a bit of a squish. Let's pop that out of the way. So what we're going to do is to make sure that those first couple of inches of wire are nice and smooth and warm. You can tighten up that little bit just there if it gets away from you. And we're going to draw that to the outside of the natural circular form which is created by the wire. The wire comes to you on a spool and it tends to have this little sort of rounded feel to it. So we're going to bring our first bead up against that little spiral of wire we've created. Now this is a very easy technique, but it's very effective in spacing out your beads on the frame wire and also giving them a little bit of a halo or a highlight. Now at the moment my finer 20 gauge wire is coming from underneath that core wire, so I'm going to draw the tail over the top of the core wire on the other side of the bead. So we've just created this little halo around the outside. I'm then going to draw that wire so that it goes all the way around the core wire. So I've just allowed it to slip underneath the remainder of those beads, and we're going to just bend that backwards on itself, so you can see we've created a little loop around the wire. And then we're going to do what I call a lazy loop. So it's a little bit like a half spiral around the core wire, and what I'm doing to begin with is just pinching on that first bead to make sure that we don't move that little halo we've created. So we're going to take that wire lazily around the core where we've threaded on all of those beads and just have a little rotation just around the wire all by itself. And then I'm going to bring the wire back over the top and bring my next bead into position. So we've got the next bead sitting ready to be encircled. So again, the finer gauge wire is underneath my 20 gauge wire, which is still attached to the spool. I'm going to draw the next bead into position, pinch all of my beads together, and then take that tail of wire around over the top of the core wire And just bearing in mind that you'll want to keep those halos in the same position on each of those beads, and then you get this lovely glint of light all the way around the outside. Now, one of the lovely things about Dragon's Vein agate, or crackle agate as it's known at our Jessie James Beads site, is that it is an opaque gemstone, but when you put light through it, it will have a little bit of a glow. So it's a very subtle sunlight catcher, but once the sun gets going, it's absolutely gorgeous. So let's hold our bead in position, hold the halo in position. We'll take the tail all the way around that core wire, so I'm just allowing it to slip underneath the rest of that strand of beads. And we're going to have a little lazy wrap just around that core wire. Now ideally we want to keep these similarly distanced apart, so let's take that again around and underneath the tail of those beads on the wire and bring that back around until we can bring our next bead in. So if you do find that there's a slightly larger gap, you can simply just scooch those very softly together to generate an equal distance between each of those beads. Think of them as a station on your beading. So the finer gauge wire comes around the outside of the bead from underneath the core wire to over the top of the core wire, and we do one rotation of wire quite close to that bead. So we'll draw that around, and that holds the bead in position, and it gives them that lovely stability, that lovely same distance apart. And then we'll do a little lazy wrap all the way around that core wire, just lifting the beads out of the way, and then we will bring our next set of beads into position. So I'm going to continue all the way around, and just as a reminder, I started with 15 or so inches of 18 gauge wire, and I'm wrapping with 20 gauge wire connected to the spool. So when you come to wrap that last bead, we're going to finish off exactly as we started. So we'll make sure that the wire sits really neatly against the core, and then we will wrap 3 times really firmly. That's twice, and a 3rd time. Let's just take that all the way around, and then we will trim away any excess wire. We're still connected to the spool, so let's just put that down out of the way, and then make sure that we've got a nice smooth finish just like so. So this would make a really beautiful collarette if you wanted to use the strand instead of separating it into 3 and 3 and having a little spare for later. You could use all 7 in exactly the same technique, and this would make a really beautiful solid necklace to wear. So we've got 3 little wraps on either end. What we need to do now is to join together in the middle at the top. So because we're working with that 18 gauge wire underneath, we've got quite a strong wire to work with. So don't worry if it's a little bit skew-if at the moment, it will all come true in just a moment. So we're going to turn a right angle bend up at the top on whichever side takes your fancy. Let's just make that a nice upright straight section for now. And then we'll bring the other one all the way around to meet it. Just make sure that you're happy with those coils and that the cut ends are really neat and tidy. So once we've just formed that around, you can take a second to make sure that you're happy. You don't have to have a round one. You can absolutely go for a pear drop, or you could go for an oval frame if you prefer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grip across the wire which we haven't yet bent, and I'm just going to put a little bit of an upward bend in it, just very, very subtly, so that when we make the bend on that angle change, what we're going to do is push that back towards itself and then fold that around the upright, so it links together really, really neatly. So we've got our main part of the sun catcher right now. What we're going to do is to bring this tail around the upright a couple of times. So let's take that once and then twice, and then just make sure that that's neat and tidy. So bring that down and give it a very gentle little squish. So we've got 2 tails of wire now to work with. The one that's coming over to the side, I'm going to trim that away, and I think I'll trim that to around about 3 inches or so. I just need to grab my round nose pliers now, and we'll turn this into a large centered large spiral. You've still got an opportunity just to make that a little bit more perfect. So let's start with those round nose pliers, and we're going for about 1/2 inch from the end of the tip of those pliers, and I'm just going to make sure that that's a nice rounded form before switching to my bent chain nose pliers. And I'm just going to rotate that little form around until we get a spiral. Mine's actually just slightly ovate in shape. I'm not going to let that worry me though. Now, the slower you move with spirals, the better. Especially as I'm working with a silver colour on copper wire today. I don't particularly want to damage that. I'd like it to remain silver. I'm going to take that all the way to the centre of that upright bar, and then I'm just going to push it down over the connection point. So what we've done there is we've hidden all of the mechanics of that connection point, and we've got a really lovely circular frame with those graduating colours of that crackled or dragon's vein agate. So that by itself is really pretty. All we will do up at the top is just make a wrapped loop. So I'm going to just grip across that wire, turn it over to the side, grab in my multi-step bail makers and just make a wrapped loop. Now you've seen this dozens of times, so I'm not going to overstate how easy this is. You've got your round form. We'll take that tail around just to fill the gap. Now you need to grip quite firmly or you can lose some of the size on that one. And if you get any bags, any gaps in that wrapping, you can just tighten that up gently to make sure it looks neat and tidy. So let's take that around one more time and then finish off on the rear of the design. Let's just tighten up that wrapping, flip it over to the other side and trim away that excess carefully. Always look twice before you cut. It's very sad if you cut the wrong bit. Make sure that sits down flat. Whilst we may not be wearing this as jewellery, we don't want it to catch on the drapes or anything like that. So just make sure that your loop sits up neat and tidy centrally at the top. That by itself is a really beautiful beaded sun catcher, and it's a great technique to have in your wire arsenal. Now there are a couple of ways that you can enhance this further. So I've got a couple of strands here. And I particularly like this one. These are all from the ombre collection, but there's always awesome beads to pick from. So what you could do is simply add that to the loop up at the top. You could go for one of them, you could go for both of them, and just allow them to hang down with that graduation in colour. That's one way that you could enhance this. The way I chose to enhance this was to add a little bit of wire writing over the top. Now you can apply your own handwriting to this, or you can follow some guidelines if you prefer. So I'm going to be working with 18 gauge wire. It's the same wire as I used for the frame of this design. And I'm just going to unspool the first little bit. You probably won't need any more than 15 to 18 inches, but I'm going to work from the spool just to give you an opportunity to see how much we use. There's around about, let's say, 15 inches unspooled already. And what we're going to do is leave a lovely tail of around about 3 inches at one end and pop a little circular form in. Let's just put that loop in. Wring those round nose pliers out of the way, and then we can work on our scripted lettering. So you can, as I say, use your own handwriting. You can sketch something out or print something in a particular font if you want to. I'm just going to go for the word love really easily. Now you can continue to use your round nose pliers, or you could use your bail makers or memory wire finishing pliers. We're going to make another loop down on the end of the L just there, and to take that around all the way. Because I'm still attached to that spool of wire, it's just a little bit tricky to show you that. So there you go. For the rest of it, I'm just going to use my fingers. Now you can use tools to help you get the same kind of shape and size over and over again, but I'm not going to worry about it. This wire is really lovely to work with, and we're just going to create the word love by chasing that wire around. So where you've got the opportunity, you can put one layer of wire over the top of the preceding layer. So we've got the L and the O. And then I'm going to grab in my chain nose pliers, my bent chain nose pliers, just to put a little bit of a kick up at here, at the end of the O there. Hold across and then bring that back down towards the V. So we had around about 15 inches of wire. We've now got around 6 inches left, which I think will probably not quite be enough. So I'll say let's cut 24 inches and that will be plenty. Just makes it slightly easier to show you the lettering technique. So we need to work on the angle to bring that V down, and I'd like the sides of the V to be quite straight and the bottom of the V to be in the same position as the bottom of the O. Let's push that wire back up the other way. Give that a little bit of a squish, and then when we get to the top of the other side of the V, I'm just going to push the wire downwards. Now, weirdly, E is my favourite letter to make when I'm working with wire, so if you get that slightly wrong, you've got an opportunity really to just fix that if you need to. Move that along ever so slightly. The reason I like making the letter E is because you can grip about a third of the way down the depth of the letter to make this lovely slanted section that goes over. And then I'm just going to draw the wire all the way around, and the letter E basically writes itself. As you bring that wire around, it just makes itself, and I really like that. I think it's very, very cool. Now you can, of course, refine the shape of the letter to match your own script if you have something in mind. I'm just going to bring that around, and then imagine where that will come across on the side there. So I'm going to trim away to about the same length on both sides. We had an excess there of about 6 inches, which will always be useful for something, so I'm just going to put that to the reuse bench. And then all you would need to do is add that in. If you wanted to add some lettering onto your beautiful sunlight catcher, you absolutely can. And to add this in, what I'm going to do is to centralise it in position. That looks pretty good to me. And I'm going to wrap once around the frame on the right and just leave that wire out to the side for a second. I'm going to make sure that I'm happy with the shape and the size of the overall form before I wrap the second wire around on the other side of the design. So take that over to the far side. If your two sections of wire are different lengths, and I think this one is just a tiny bit longer, just trim them so they're the same length, and then add a spiral in exactly the same way. I'll photograph these side by side, but don't forget you've got so many beads to choose from at Jessie Dames Beads, which will work with these designs. I particularly like that one, so I might add that in just a minute.